Hello Rayclast, what is up? I am going to do a little video here leading up to the league start. I have looked through all of the information we have so far about all the new skill gems and stuff, which is by far the most exciting news to me of the new league because, as you know, I like to make lots of different builds, so new skill gems is usually the thing I'm pretty much most excited for. You're probably going to hear lots of background noise and stuff in this video. We've got a little bird flying around and chirping and stuff, so I doubt he'll be polite enough to be quiet for the video, so you'll just have to put up with that. So basically, we're just going to go through the video here on the website where they talked about each of the skill gems, and at the same time, we'll look further down the page, look at the actual details on the skill gems here, which we only have level 1 of for now, but I'll give you my thoughts on how some of these skills might be used and how they might fit into the meta or not, and hopefully this will give you some guidance as to whether or not you might want to actually pick up any of these skills in the new league. So we will go ahead and play the video for the first one here.
The Earthbreaker support gem can be linked to any slam skill. Upon use, it summons an ancestor totem that uses that slam on your behalf. In this example, we've created a build that summons multiple ancestor totems that each wield tectonic slam. As you can see, this build covers a large area in fiery death while you get to stay out of harm's way. This is a powerful option for chieftains in particular due to the various totem bonuses available on their ascendancy passive tree. Adept players will also be wondering if the Earthbreaker support allows you to create leap slamming totems, and the answer is absolutely. As with other ancestor totems, the Earthbreaker support also provides a buff to you, granting some increased area of effect with melee skills.
Alright, so that is that for the Earthbreaker support. If you've watched any of my streams in the past and stuff, you'll know I'm probably pretty excited about this one because various times I've said I really wish there was just a melee attack totem like there's a ranged attack totem. This is almost there. I'm a little disappointed that it's only slam skills. I wish it was also strike skills and maybe gave bonus range like Ancestral Protector did. But regardless, it seems pretty cool. The level 1 gem over here, you can see it's got a 19% damage penalty and 30% attack speed penalty at level 1. That's pretty in line with the other things we have like ranged attack totems and spell totems at this point. So numerically, it seems like it should be pretty good. I think this one's got a lot of potential. I think probably your ground slams and your tectonic slams, maybe earthquakes are the biggest one. Don't know if you really want to use Earthquake with it unless you're going all in on the less duration stuff, because that's kind of a lot of delay before your damage comes out. You got to summon the totem, wait for the totem to activate, and then wait for it to Earthquake, and then wait for the Aftershock to go off. I think you're a lot better off with Ground Slam or Tectonic Slam. I definitely think it's going to be a viable way to play the game. This is one of the stronger gems, in my opinion, of the new ones to come out. We all know totems are pretty good at most things in the game, and I don't see why these totems will be any different. Chris mentioning Leap Slam totems there, maybe a funny meme build, but I don't think that'll actually be very effective because Leap Slam does garbage damage and has garbage AoE, so even the fact that your totems could move, they'll still probably clear way faster if you just put Ground Slam or Tech Slam on them. So let's see what we've got up next.
Rage Vortex provides a new way to consume your rage, unleashing a whirling vortex that rapidly hits enemies within its range. It gains damage and area of effect based on how much rage was sacrificed. The vortex slows down when enemies survive being hit by it, causing it to deal intense damage to tough targets. While you can only have one rage vortex active at a time, characters such as berserkers who are able to generate a lot of rage quickly will find it a great way to augment their damage output.
Alright, so Rage Vortex, this is one of the ones I'm kind of disappointed in, I've got to say. It looks cool, but numerically I think it seems pretty bad. This is only the level 1 version, so maybe it'll have some interesting things that scale on it as it goes up. But it's not too promising, even if you invest in Rage a bit and have like 70 max Rage so that you're sacrificing 14 Rage when you sacrifice 20%. It's still just not that great because it has attack speed 70% of base, attack damage 40% of base, and of course it hits the 250% more frequently, but if we do the math there, we take the 0.7 base damage times the 0.4 or 0.7 base attack speed times the 0.4 base damage. We multiply that by 3.5 to account for that 250% more hit frequency. Got an extra space in there. That's still only less than 100% base damage per second, which is really bad. And even if you sacrificed 14 rage at 5% each, you get 14 times 5. That's 70. So even if you multiply this by 1.7, you're still only looking at 1.66 base damage per second, which is like significantly worse than pretty much any other melee attack skill in the game. So unless it has some interesting scaling as it levels up, I don't see this one being super useful. It looks interesting for clear, but I can't imagine it clearing better than like a ground slam or anything else you might be using in that regard. So at best, I could see it as some supplementary thing that you throw on just for some extra boss damage. Since it does have a base duration of 3 seconds, is pretty long, you could definitely chuck one of those out every 3 seconds to possibly get a little extra damage on top of your normal attack. But numerically, this one looks pretty bad just with the level 1 info. We'll have to see when we get the full gem info at level 20 if it does scale in some interesting way, but the numbers are not looking too promising for Rage Vortex off the bat. So we'll go ahead into the next one.
Bone Shatter strikes your enemies with a forceful blow. If an enemy is stunned by this attack, a powerful shockwave is released. The area of effect of the shockwave is determined by the duration of the stun you inflicted. Each time you use Bone Shatter against an enemy, you take physical damage yourself and gain a trauma stack. The more stacks you have, the more damage Bone Shatter will deal to both you and your enemies. This self-damage mechanic makes the Juggernaut the ideal class for the skill, because they have easy access to lots of armor to mitigate the downside. Also, the Juggernaut has ascendancy passives that grant increased stun duration, which help make sure the shockwave is as large as possible.
Alright, so into Bone Shatter here. This is another one that I don't really think is going to see much play and doesn't really have much of a place in the meta. The numbers on it are good at 85% of base attack speed and 200% base damage. That's like pretty solid, and it's got some flat fizz on it. However, it's really, really hard to stun endgame bosses, so you're probably not really going to be able to keep up much in the way of trauma stacks on endgame bosses for the extra damage. The way that it hurts you could be used in some interesting ways for cast from damage taken setups, but even if you have really big stun duration and everything, I can't see the AoE possibly clearing better than something like a ground slam or earthquake. In terms of the clear speed, and I really don't see you ever using this in place of a very similar skill in Heavy Strike for your single target in a stun bill. Heavy Strike has way higher percent base damage. It goes up to like 255%, I think, despite starting only 5% lower than Bone Shatter, and it's got built-in stun stuff. I'm hoping maybe GGG will add some kind of stun duration or reduced enemy stun threshold with this, because as it is, like I said, I don't think it's going to clear better than any slams, and I don't think it's going to single target better than a very similar skill in Heavy Strike. So this one kind of seems dead on arrival, but we'll have to see. Again, maybe it gets some interesting scaling as it goes up, and perhaps there's some kind of janky way you could work in a stun setup for bosses to try and stack up a ton of trauma stacks and then like blast the boss right as it comes out. We'll have to see. It doesn't mention if there's a limit on trauma stacks, so I'm kind of guessing there's not. In the video it went up to like 6 or 7 at some points, so maybe there's some high limit on it, but it doesn't mention one. So if you could find a way to stack the trauma a lot, then possibly this skill could be useful. But as we see so far, I don't think it really has much of a place.
Defiance Banner is a new purely defensive banner skill. While you carry the Defiance Banner, it increases the armor and evasion of nearby allies while reducing the critical strike chance of nearby enemies. It also gains stages while carried near enemies and can be placed on the ground to enhance its effects. When the Defiance Banner is placed, it inflicts a taunt on enemies for a duration based on the number of stages the banner had accumulated while it was carried. Enemies affected by this taunt also deal less damage to all targets.
So Defiance Banner is kind of an interesting one. If we look at the champion here, makes it so banner skills have no reservation, which means you could stack it with another banner skill if you wanted to go ahead and use the Perfidy body armor. That and maybe some hardcore applications are really the only ways I see this getting much play. Perfidy is somewhat broken on the wiki here, so let's just go to PoEDB instead. I want to double check the wording on Perfidy. Does it let you have one additional banner or just say multiple banners? Still only 2 different banners at the same time. I could see maybe if you wanted to do a Perfidy build using this in place of either War Banner or Dread Banner, but realistically with the state the game is in, even though it does have some pretty nice defensive bonuses on it here, with the reduced crit strike chance on enemies and the extra evasion armor. Maybe if you were doing some kind of a stacker on evasion or armor, it could be helpful, but in general, I don't see it getting a lot of play. Not because it's bad in a vacuum, but just because I think it's significantly worse than either of the other banners we have so far. And that's what you got to think about anytime you're looking at something new in PoE, similar to Bone Shatter versus Heavy Strike, is like, does this actually offer me anything that is better than an existing option? If not, it's probably not going to see much play, so I'm not real hyped on Defiance banner, but we'll see. Maybe somebody could work it into some sort of armor or evasion stacker. We'll have to find out on that one.
Next new skill is Shield Crush, which swipes your shield towards enemies and sends out forceful waves of damage based on the stats of your shield. These waves can shotgun enemies with up to 2 hits at once, so while Shield Crush is great against groups, it's also effective against single targets and can be used alongside Shield Charge and Spectral Shield Throw. We've improved both of these skills so that the overall aggressive shield build is more powerful.
So Shield Crush is actually a pretty crazy one so far if we look at the numbers on it. I'm interested to see what they did to Shield Charge and Spectral Shield Throw as well. I thought Spectral Shield Throw was actually in a pretty good place after the last round of buffs, and if it's been buffed even more, like on a similar level to this Shield Crush, I think it's going to be a really strong build, and this Shield Crush in its own right looks super strong. We don't know how high that just base damage is going to go. Not too worried about that because most of it's going to come for your scaling. I was really surprised when I looked at the number on this. It's got 5 base crit chance, which not great, but you could scale that into some sort of crit build, but just the raw damage on it is insane. 5 to 7 added physical per 15 armor or evasion on your shield, that's 6 average. So say you had 2500 armor and or evasion on a shield, which is really not that hard to get these days. We divide that by 15, multiply that by 6, multiply that by 2 because you can hit a single target twice, and then multiply that by 1 divided by 0.85 to account for that attack time. That is 2,352 base damage per second on single target with just a 2500 armor shield that is pretty easy to acquire. That is really, really high base DPS, and it looks like it probably is a reasonably good clear skill as well if you stack a little AoE. So I think this one is definitely going to be an outstanding one, and one that could be really strong in a variety of builds, whether you want to go evasion or armor. Don't know how viable going crit will be with it, because it's not like Spectral Shield Throw where you can get extra base crit by going with an energy shield, but I don't know, if you get, Hatred Watcher's Eye, if you want to stack it that way, or just crit on a body armor, I definitely could see this scaling to some really insane damage numbers, or even just raw impale. I think this will be a pretty solid league starter, just looking at what we see with it so far, because it so easily gets such a giant amount of base DPS, and you can just go impale non-crit, and I think you'll crush everything pretty easily with that until you feel like scaling crit later on. So that one is definitely a standout in terms of power. Even if it's not particularly flashy or interesting, it looks very strong, so definitely recommending you look into that one.
The new Behead support gem can only support strike skills and is basically like a mini headhunter. When a supported strike kills a rare enemy, you'll steal one of its modifiers. Obviously this gem can't be as crazy as the full headhunter experience, so it comes with some restrictions. Stolen modifiers can persist for 20 seconds, and slaying another rare enemy will replace the modifier you have active. The Behead support gem also grants you more damage against enemies on low life. In conjunction with the Slayer's Bane of Legends Ascendancy passive, this bonus really embraces the execution theme of the Behead support.
This one, not super interesting to me, just because if we look at the numbers, they're a little bit disappointing. Now, one thing we have to consider is that we don't know exactly how much all of the other generic damage supports are getting nerfed. It's mentioned that most of the generic damage supports are being toned down, so maybe as this thing levels up, the number will get to an acceptable point where it seems worth using. The sort of mini-inspired learning effect on it is interesting, but just doesn't seem that powerful in general. The fact that you only get one modifier from a rare you kill, and that modifier gets replaced because you can only have one at a time, it'll have like a very, very tiny marginal improvement on your strength during general mapping. So I don't see that as actually being a major selling point of it, even though that's sort of the interesting part of the gem. I think the actual power level of that part is pretty negligible. The extra strike range seems like it could be useful sometimes. And, you know, I guess if you get to a boss and you happen to have the right modifier from the right rare mob and you kept refreshing it with this 20% chance to recharge the duration, that could be nice, but the biggest bosses in the game, you don't have the opportunity to kill rare mobs before anyways. And even on the ones you do, like a map boss or whatever, what are the chances you actually have a mod that's going to help you significantly with killing a map boss? Probably not very much, so at the end of the day, I think you're really just looking on that more damage with hits and ailments against enemies on low life. 30% at level 1 is pretty good, but you gotta remember that only kicks in once they get down to 50% health, so you can really consider that as being like 15% more, and even as that scales up, I don't see it outpacing even a nerfed version of a pure damage support. So I really don't think you're going to see much use out of this one unless somebody just wants the meme of the stolen buffs, but the actual power level of that is pretty tiny.
Storm Rain is a new bow skill that fires arrows that stick into the ground. These arrows periodically pulse with lightning damage that arcs to nearby arrows. This skill works very well with multiple projectiles because you can quickly set up a large patch of lightning death. Existing
Storm Rain looks pretty interesting. I would say it seems average in general. Looking at the numbers here, I have to assume it can shotgun, so like you want to get a lot of them stacked out around a boss and essentially have them all arcing and hitting the boss multiple times. It's only got 46% base damage and no added damage on it, so with how low that number is, I've got to assume it could shotgun. If you stack up a lot of attack speed and manage to get a lot of these things out at once, I think it could be pretty powerful depending on sort of the RNG you get where your projectiles land and how much the boss is moving. Looks fun for clear. I don't know if it's really going to compare to just a regular rain of arrows in that regard, since it's got an extra sort of delay effect on it. But it's got built-in lightning conversion. Oh, right there it says each arrow can fire 4 beams. So, I don't know. If you were lucky and had good stacking all around an enemy, perhaps you could get like 4 times 4, maybe 16 shots at a time hitting the enemy. Sounds like it could be pretty good. They are at a fixed rate, presumably that attack speed. Yeah, it doesn't look like the attack speed affects your beams at all, or your beam frequency at all, so I don't know. This one I think will just have to play out. It looks reasonably numerically sound and mechanically average, so I think it's going to be one that, if you like the look of it, play it. I think it'll be sort of an average skill. Nothing stand out, but doesn't seem garbage either, so definitely look at it. Look to stack a lot of attack speed, maybe even a little bit of skill effect duration, and we'll see how that goes. It actually doesn't even have a duration tag. Doesn't say how long the arrows last, so maybe no skill effect duration. I think this one's going to be pretty average, but it does look pretty snazzy. It's mechanically interesting, even if the effectiveness of those mechanics is average.
Ballista skills in Path of Exile pick their own targets, like sentry guns do. They'll start shooting immediately and will generally target the closest enemies. While this behavior is usually great, sometimes you want fine control over what your ballistas will fire at. The focused ballista support gem causes your ballistas to pick the same targets as you, and they will only fire when you fire your own ranged weapon. It also makes the ballistas fire a lot faster than they otherwise would. This support gem allows you to effectively focus fire on specific enemies such as bosses.
This one's definitely got some potential. I played, not last league, but the league before, I played my first ever ballista build. I did shrapnel ballista. Got some of the highest damage I've ever had just stacking up impales with shotgunning. This seems like a pretty solid support. It's going to be a different play style than perhaps some other ballista things. You want to make sure that you're actually attacking, because that seems like that's the only time your totems will attack. But if you can manage to balance your damage and your totem's damage and survivability pretty well, I think this will be pretty solid. It seems like it's got really high DPS potential, even if it's a little clunky. Not really that mechanically interesting or diverse. I don't think there's a lot to talk about it. It just makes it so your totems fire when you fire instead of firing automatically. Definitely potential for a lot of damage there, and could be a semi-interesting playstyle. But in general, I think you're basically getting extra damage in exchange for clunkiness. Not sure how much people will like about that. Sort of the big benefit of totems in general that people consider is you drop them down and they'll keep shooting at the boss while you run around dodging mechanics. If you have to also shoot to make your totems shoot, that seems kind of clunky and seems to sort of defeat the whole purpose of totems, but I do think there's some pretty insane damage potential there, so we'll have to see what people want to do with that. I think it's a case of clunkiness versus power.
Explosive Concoction is quite a novel skill. It introduces several new concepts that haven't been explored with skills before. Here you can see the Pathfinder throwing an explosive projectile at monsters. Firstly, you may notice that the Pathfinder isn't holding any weapons. This is because Explosive Concoction is the very first ranged skill that can and must be used unarmed. It's also the first skill that directly interacts with the benefits provided by your flasks. When you throw your Explosive Concoction onto a targeted area, it deals fire damage and uses available charges from your Ruby, Sapphire, and Topaz flasks to grant bonuses based on what flask charges were used. The skill still works even if you don't have the appropriate flasks or charges to consume, but correctly managing your flask setup can greatly enhance the power of this skill. What we really love about this gem is that it brings to life the idea of throwing your flasks at enemies and having them explode. In conjunction with the flask-focused benefits provided by the Pathfinder's Ascendancy passive skills, we're really excited to see what new playstyles are enabled by this gem.
So this is one I'm pretty stoked about. I don't think I'm going to try it as a league starter just because it seems a little janky for that. But it's super interesting mechanically. The damage numbers look really good for a level 28 skill, just the base fire damage and then those added lightning and colds if you have the right flasks. Obviously Pathfinder is the go-to choice for this. You want as much flask charges as possible. You could try to do some kind of ignite build to 30% more damage with ignite if charges were consumed from a ruby flask. I'm going to assume that like most of the lines on this skill description are going to scale as the gem levels rather than just the added fire damage. I imagine the 5 base critical strike chance will stay the same. But this is super interesting mostly because it's an attack rather than a spell. I've actually got a tree planned for this already. I'm not going to bother showing that right now because we don't know for sure what the numbers are going to look like. But it opens some really interesting ideas. Since it's an attack, if we go look at something like Doriani's Fist, it has to be used unarmed. Man, PoE errors, or PoE wiki is not wanting to load anything here, so we'll just keep going to the DB. If we go to Doriani's Fist, since you've got to use this unarmed anyways, that's going to give you up to 225 to 600 lightning damage to your unarmed attacks, and this is an unarmed attack. And then the other really interesting one that'll give you some good scaling options is Rigwald's Curse, the amulet, for unarmed critting. The way this is worded, it just says +5 to critical strike chance rather than 5 base critical strike chance, which means it should stack with anything else. So then over here on Rigwald's, you've got +7 to unarmed attack critical strike chance. So with Rigwald's in this, that's giving you 12 base critical strike chance, and then it lets you grab some claw nodes on the tree. I guess I can bring this up. So you can grab all these claw nodes for like attack speed and damage and crit. More claw crit stuff up here. You get all your... the one thing that I think will be kind of difficult with this is accuracy. You're going to need quite a bit of accuracy. So like I've got a couple accuracy wheels picked up. Get all the flask stuff and all the Pathfinder flask stuff. I won't be surprised at all if there are some nerfs to some of the Pathfinder nodes, given that this, one of the big things in this expansion is toning down of flasks in general. So I won't be surprised if some of these are nerfed, but in general I think this could be a super interesting to scale and play character. Get all those flask charges up as much as possible. Presumably, looking at the mechanics, it seems like it's shotguns, so you want multiple projectiles because they are ground explosions. And if you stack up a lot of that on that tree there, even without any crit from gear, and with the 12 base, I guess, excluding the 12 base crit that you get from using Rigwald's Curse, I was up at something like 71% crit, even without a diamond flask. So you can get to really high crit really easy on this. We'll have to see how big these added damage numbers go, but I think this one has a lot of potential for just being kind of a shotgunning, blasting, big LE damage skill. Possibly even could try to work in Trinity, depending on how far up that base fire damage goes relative to the lightning. It's going to be a little hard with Doriani's Fist, because that's going to give you so much lightning, but if you can work Trinity in there, I think this skill has a lot of potential, and it looks super interesting.
This is the ambush skill. It teleports you up to an enemy, blinds them, and exerts your next one-handed melee attack. This exerted attack has a high critical strike chance and multiplier. In addition to this helping your assassinations, you can also use ambush to quickly re-engage targets after dashing away.
This one seems kind of bad for me. If you look back in the video there, one thing that's nice about it is it doesn't seem to trigger the cooldowns of other skills. So like you could see when he used it to reclose on its Eerie, it didn't use one of the cooldown usages of the dash. So could be nice for closing. We'll have to see how high up that crit chance and crit multi go. The only way I really see this being very useful, and it's a little rough because it's a one-hander, is like maybe if you were doing like an ignite, what's it called here? Ignite Perfect Agony, and you just wanted like a bunch of extra crit multi for one attack. That's the main problem I see with it, is like for 99.9% of builds, it really doesn't do you any good to have extra crit multi for one attack. You kind of have to convert that into some sort of ongoing damage. Nice little movement and the free blind, I guess, but I see this one being pretty useless in general. Unfortunately, I don't think hardly anyone is going to use this. Seems kind of dead on arrival just because it's a one-strike exert that you can't even stack with other exerts. What does it say here? I think, yeah, attacks exerted by this skill cannot be exerted by other skills, so you can't even, like, stack it with some of the other war cries and stuff to get up some kind of giga Vol ground slam to obliterate a boss or whatever. So in general, doesn't seem very useful. Not excited about that one.
Voltaxic Burst grants a buff that counts down to 0, triggering a burst of lightning damage around you with a portion of that damage converted to chaos damage. Enemies slain by your Voltaxic Burst will also explode, dealing chaos damage around them based on their maximum life. You can stack up many Voltaxic Bursts on yourself at the same time. Consider using duration modifiers to modify the timing of the explosion so that you can cast the skill from safety and then move into a strategic position before it explodes.
This one basically just seems like a good clear skill. I think the way you're going to want to play this one is actually by just reducing the duration as much as possible, whether that be skill tree stuff or some items or using the less duration gem. There'll probably be a Helm enchant for less duration and increased duration on it, I'm guessing. Or possibly reduced or more. We'll see which direction that goes. But base duration 2.5 seconds. It's pretty similar mechanically to actually old Static Strike, the melee skill, before that was reworked. You do something and then a few seconds later it explodes. The real selling point, obviously, is that it's got the built-in corpse explosion on everything it kills. Stack some nice AoE on that. Like I said, I think you just want to reduce the duration so it actually just blows up like right away when you use it. Looking at the numbers, it's a level 12 skill. It's got similar damage to like Arc at level 12, but doesn't have the bonus damage for remaining chains or anything like that. So the damage is going to be pretty mediocre. It does, in terms of single target, it doesn't have any like projectile shotgunning or chaining or any shenanigans you can do with Hydrosphere or anything. The damage is what it is. You could use a Voltaxic Rift, of course, and convert the rest to chaos damage if you wanted to, and try to do some big chaos damage shocks and stuff. But in general, it seems like purely a clear skill, and a very good one at that. I think it'll be a very solid clear skill if you knock some of that duration off and just pop big screens with explosions. Everybody likes that now that a lot of the other sources of explosions are gone. So knock yourself out on clear on that one. Not super interesting mechanically, really. I think you just want to try and get rid of the duration and use the explosions for clearing, and you'll definitely want something else for single target. Not that with enough investment you can't scale anything to do big damage, but it doesn't have any built-in single target bonus mechanics, so I wouldn't bother with it. Use something else for single target and just enjoy this for the fun clear skill that it looks like.
When you use Blade Trap, you throw out a mechanical device with 2 copies of your weapon attached. These blades spin rapidly in a circle a set number of times, dealing damage to anything they pass through. When dual wielding, the trap rotates faster but deals damage based on both weapons. Because it's a trap, Blade Trap behaves a little differently to other attack skills by operating independently of your attack speed. This means you'll have some interesting itemization choices to make and focusing more on damage modifiers rather than the typical focus of maximizing attack speed.
This one looks kind of interesting. The blade trap. Looks like you can only use it with daggers or claws, so you can't use the sort of what would have been an obvious scaling mechanism of using one of the like unique two-handers or whatever that just do giga damage per hit but have slow attack speed. I mean, attack builds, it's basically turning a trap build into an attack build. You can kind of scale them to infinity with damage, so I think with investment it'll be pretty good. The AoE looks pretty tiny. I mean, I'm sure that was without any investment or anything, but that base AoE looks pretty small, so I don't think it'll be a great clearer. But mechanically interesting, could be used a lot of different ways. You know, you can scale it a lot of different ways. You could go even poison with it. Might be interesting. It says trap attack AoE, so, you know, presumably you can go impale with it as well. It's an interesting idea. You know, we've had being able to use traps and mines for ranged attacks for a long time. This is the first time we get to use a melee attack with a trap. Good scaling potential probably just because, you know, any melee damage skill is going to have good scaling potential, but mechanically doesn't look super powerful. Definitely room for it though. If you like traps and you like the idea of a melee trap, go for it. I don't think it'll be meta by any means, but it does look like it's reasonable and you could probably scale it to do just about anything.
Summon Reaper creates a single powerful minion that uses fast melee physical attacks which cause bleeding. While the Reaper is active, you can use the skill again to direct the Reaper to a specific location, dealing a powerful attack along its path. The Reaper wants to be your only minion. It reduces the life and damage of your other minions, and will consume them to heal itself and gain damage and speed buffs. When designing this new skill for the Necromancer, we wanted to explore the idea of having a single ultimate minion. While there were ways to somewhat achieve this before, the Reaper is quite different in its abilities and interactions with other minions. It also feels much more active and directly under your control. One quick note though, the Reaper will absolutely eat your animated Guardian if you're not careful.
Alright, so the Summon Reaper here, this one is the one that's definitely the hardest to comment on out of this whole batch of skills, because it is going to be entirely down to how smooth it feels. How aggressive is that AI? How fast is it? How does it interact with multi-strike and other support gems? It has the potential to be really good or the potential to be very mediocre. You're definitely going to want to use other minions with it, like zombies and stuff. Spectre's pretty useless because if it eats one of your specters, that's a pain to resummon. Don't want to use an animate guardian with it, as it mentioned. So basically you're going to want zombies to still act as that meat shield and stuff for you, maybe skeletons or whatever else you want to throw in there. This one is just going to be entirely down to how it feels, and obviously we won't know that until we get our hands on it, so I can't comment much on this one, so we'll move to the next one.
Forbidden Rite is a powerful new spell that fires an exploding chaos projectile at a targeted area. It also targets a selection of enemies in an area around the player's location and fires projectiles at them too. But be careful, Forbidden Rite also inflicts damage on you when cast. If you can find a clever way to mitigate this harmful downside, you'll have devastating and widespread damage at your fingertips.
This one, I think, has some interesting potential. It looks like it's probably shotgunny, so if you get extra projectiles and whatnot, then perhaps you can shotgun single targets pretty well. And of course, the auto-homing on nearby enemies is going to be pretty strong for clearing. One thing that definitely stands out about this skill is, unlike some of the previous options we've had, which, who knows, may get changed in the patch notes, where they cost life or mana, where they just sacrificed it, you couldn't use those with cast when damage taken setups here, but this one says it actually deals a percentage of your life or mana as chaos damage to you. So you could use that to trigger some cast when damage taken setups, which could incorporate them more interestingly into your build. Or you can go the other route of just making sure you have max chaos res, good recovery. You can even do the blanking on the name now, the keystone that gives you up to 85% max chaos res and just really reduce the damage it's dealing to you in that way. It's got a little bit of base chaos damage, but you're definitely going to want a big pool because the scaling is off of 40% of your life and 25% of your maximum energy shield, or other way, 5% of your max energy shield, 12% of your life. The 40% and 25% are the amount you take. So basically, I mean, it seems numerically good. You can jack that up pretty high. Anything that scales damage off of life or energy shield has the potential to be really good. Or really bad, realistically. That's one of the problems that Chris and others have mentioned in the past with balancing skills like Righteous Fire. Anytime you're stacking defenses to also stack your damage, it can be problematic balance-wise, but mechanically it looks interesting, and the way that you can use it to trigger cast when damage taken should make it a pretty interesting skill, and one that I think would be pretty viable overall. The numbers look good. I did some math on it before out of the video, and if you stack up a reasonable amount of life and energy shield, you can get this thing doing pretty respectable damage.
Of Winter is a large projectile that fires out a barrage of cold projectiles in a spiral formation as it travels. When it reaches its maximum distance or collides with the terrain, it explodes, firing out even more projectiles in a spiral. This type of skill is one we've been wanting to bring to Path of Exile for a long time, and we felt that this new collection of skills was the perfect place to showcase it. This Inquisitor.
This one, as we all know, is obviously Frozen Orb from Diablo 2. Looks pretty solid mechanically. The numbers look a little low, but that's because it's a shotgunning skill. You always have to take those with a grain of salt, based on what Chris was saying in the Q&A, and actually, if you look closely, you can see it on one of the rare mobs in the video there. If you space yourself so that the ball lands directly over your target, the boss or whatever you're trying to kill, all of the projectiles that it fires in the end will hit that target. So that one definitely has some big potential for stacking up as many projectiles as possible and shotgunning your enemies super hard. And mechanically it looks cool. You know, there's a skill people have wanted for a long time. This one is just purely going to be down to the numbers on how good it feels, but anything that shotguns you can typically scale really high, and I imagine if you use chain or pierce or fork or whatever you want, it should clear pretty well too. So this one very promising, looks very fun, and I'm pretty excited for it.
Is using the new Battlemage's Cry skill, which taunts nearby enemies and exerts your subsequent attacks, causing them to trigger a linked spell on your next melee hit. Here you can see the player taunting enemies with Battlemage's Cry and using Consecrated Path to teleport to enemies. The slam is exerted, triggering Firestorm to rain down on those enemies. In order to assist with scaling both attack and spell damage, the buff this Warcry provides lets your spell damage apply to your attacks. This property is usually only available on wands and certain unique items. Manabond.
This one seems a little iffy. This is one of the ones that was obviously like the most exciting when you first look at it, but then when you think of how the scaling actually works in this game, it seems a bit questionable. I'm mostly seeing it, if anything, I see it being used for like utility spells, because realistically slams and stuff clear so well nowadays that adding whatever spell on top to actually do damage and clear probably not going to be that useful. The way that it can scale up to 150% spell damage applied to your attacks could be okay, but again, seems pretty iffy. There's other sources of that Chris mentioned. It's one of these things that really seems like a novelty. Like, if you want to support it up, it's going to take up a bunch of links on your gear somewhere, just so you can trigger what's probably going to end up feeling as a pretty mediocre spell. The only way you're really going to be doing this is with staves, because staves have the nodes that scale global crit for attacks and spells while wielding a stave. There's some spell damage while wielding staves and stuff, which will then, of course, apply to your attack damage. But in general, I think you're basically going to be cobbling together spell and attack damage into one just for the sake of novelty rather than power. Don't think it's going to beat either of those things scaled properly on their own. So this is one that's cool on paper, but in practice will probably fall pretty flat, but does look fun, even if the effectiveness isn't there. So, you know, definitely throw it in somewhere. Use it for some kind of utility setup if you feel like there's something you want to get triggering on a boss, and I think that's probably going to be the most effective way to actually work it into your builds.
It is a somewhat unusual gem in that its source of power relies on your current mana. Upon use, it creates a rune that explodes at a location you're targeting. This explosion can either deal more damage or cover a larger area depending on the state of your mana. The more mana that's missing from your mana pool, the more damage Manabond will deal, as it converts a percentage of your missing mana into added lightning damage. The more full your mana pool is, the more area the explosion will cover. This means that being adept at managing your mana pool becomes highly advantageous. For example, having slightly higher mana while clearing a map provides greater clear speed, but when fighting tougher enemies, having a lower current mana amount is better.
This one looks pretty interesting. Looks like the clear speed's pretty sick. It's level 12 skill. The base lightning damage is whatever, because obviously you're working on scaling off of your missing mana. Deals base damage equal to 15% of your missing unreserved mana. I did some calcs before. Let's say you have 9,000 missing mana. It's not too hard to hit 10,000 mana on like a Mind Over Matter build, though it's a little sketchy to then burn all that mana to get low for this. But, you know, that's going to give you 1350 base lightning damage. That's pretty high. It's got 6% base crit rather than 5 is nice, and 0.8 cast time. Not a super great cast time there, but, you know, average-ish these days, a little on the slower end. Mostly it looks like a good clear scale, and I'm sure you can also scale it to be pretty heavy single target, but it's a little weird because, you know, if you're stacking that much mana, it's probably because you're a Mind Over Matter build, and then you're making yourself really squishy by burning all that mana so that you can then do big damage with Manabond. But we'll see how it pans out. It looks interesting, and there's definitely potential there if you're willing to deal with the jankiness.
Absolution has been designed for Guardians as a spell version of Dominating Blow. Absolution deals a damaging shockwave in a targeted area. When it kills an enemy, it summons a Sentinel of Absolution, which also deals damage by casting Absolution itself. The Sentinels also periodically cast a larger version of Absolution on the cooldown. While the Sentinels version of Absolution can't summon even more minions, they are a powerful army to fight against. Spectral.
This one seems a little iffy to me, mostly because the minion limit is only 3. We'll have to see how powerful each one is, and it's a cool concept. I'm guessing the minion limit doesn't scale or anything, because in the video there he still just had 3. And like Dominating Blow, which he compared it to there, has way more minions, and they're just static at the base level. It doesn't go up as you level the gem or anything. So this one's just going to come down to how much damage they really do. I mean, they have the advantage, obviously, of you not having to go into melee to summon them, unlike Dominating Blow. Probably just something you're going to augment in another build. I don't see them being either mechanically or numerically powerful enough to, like, replace your main minion on another summoner build. But does give you, you know, another vector of scaling, another thing you can work on. Only 5% base crit chance is a little iffy. But it is nice that it's physical with built-in conversion. There's always a decent way to scale that. I don't know, it's like you want to scale it so that you're doing pretty good damage with it in addition to the minions. You're going to grab the node that makes it so minion damage applies to you and stack a bunch of minion damage, but you're not going to be critting anyways because it's only 5% base crit. This one is another one that I think, just like the Reaper, it's going to be all down to feel. You know, how well do they actually target? It sucks that minion spells can't be supported by Spell Cascade, because that looks like an obvious choice for using it for you. It's a ground target circle, but the minions won't benefit from that, so you don't want to use it. That one's really down to feel and personal preference. I don't think it's going to be super powerful just looking at the mechanics of it at this point. Don't think it's going to replace your main minions, and minion builds are generally so starved for sockets that can you really even fit in a supplementary setup for something that's going to do like maybe 15% extra damage? I doubt it, so I don't think that one's going to see a lot of play other than people who just like it for the aesthetics.
Spectral Helix throws a spectral copy of your melee weapon which spirals outwards from you, dealing damage to any enemies it passes through. The design of this skill achieves what we always wanted Val Spectral Throw to be. We thought it was a really fun idea for a skill, but because of the limitations caused by the soul-gathering requirements of Val skills, it wasn't possible to use Val Spectral Throw as a primary skill. Now that Spectral Helix can live up to this purpose, we've reworked Val Spectral Throw, which we'll reveal closer to release. One of the other issues that Val Spectral Throw had was that it didn't work very well in indoors areas. However, Spectral Helix improves upon this, as the projectiles that spiral outwards can also bounce off of walls and proceed to hit enemies, rather than simply disappearing upon collision.
Alright, so that's the last skill we have to look at, is the Spectral Helix here. It's got 160% base damage at level 1 and doesn't have any attack speed penalty, similar to Spectral Throw. A lot of this I think is going to come down to how many times can you realistically get it to hit single targets. Modifiers to number of projectiles instead apply to the number of bounces. You could see that being relevant in some indoor areas in terms of single target. Clear, it looks fun, all the bouncing and stuff around looks fun, and, you know, in open areas it's going to function super similar to how Val Spectral Throw did previously. except that you don't get as many projectiles out covering as fast since it doesn't make them split, so I hate to say it because there's several of them in here, and a lot of these new skills look super cool, but this is another one that really seems more style over substance. It seems like it has some niche cases where it can be reasonably powerful, but unless you get some pretty good overlapping on the, you know, rotations around for single targets, so each throw is hitting a single target multiple times, if it doesn't get that very well, it's not going to have very good single target. And it looks like even with decent projectile speed, it takes so long for the projectiles to spread out around you that it's not going to be super great for clearing either, just because there's going to be such a delay on it. It'd be the kind of skill where, you know, you can throw a couple and then move on, but then it's annoying to have to come back and get your loot afterwards. So more style over substance, like I said. There are a couple in here that I'm really excited about and I think seem super powerful. Shield Crush seems fun. The Concoction one seems like it's fun and has a lot of potential for power. The Chaos Lightning one seems like it is pretty good for clear, even if the single target is mediocre. Blade Trap seems like it could be scaled well, though mechanically isn't super interesting. One of the ones that, you know, as I said, is the biggest mystery is the Summon Reaper. Super cool idea thematically, but it's all just going to come down to how good actually is that one minion, how much AoE can it cover, how does it interact with certain support gems. Overall, I'm really excited. I think there's a lot of possibilities for new builds here, even if some of the gems aren't super exciting or or at least aren't numerically or mechanically advantageous enough to really be worth considering using. I hope you enjoyed the skill breakdown. Hope it gave you some maybe ideas on what you might want to league start with or look into ways to scale and to implement these new skills in your builds. Thank you all for watching. I'll be making videos when the new league starts as usual, and I'll see you then.